start. There we go. And it should let you know that the recording is happening. Okay, great. So I'd like to first introduce our organizers for this fish habitat seminar, who are the main organizing group. So Jessica Coakley, who's with the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council in the US, and has been with the council since 2004 and has 20+ years of experience with fisheries management and science issues. I want to give a wave, Jessica Coakley, or our US Jessica. Jessica Samioto is with DFO in the Maritimes region and is the head of the Scallop and benthic habitat unit in Population Ecology Division at the Bedford Institute of Oceanography. And Laurel Smith is a research fisheries biologist with NOAA in the Northeast Fisheries Science Center in Woods Hole. And Laurel leads the offshore working group for the Northeast Regional Habitat Assessment. So I will hand it over to our first speakers.
I'm Laurel Smith. Can you all hear me? I'm going to get up the talk. All right, can you see that?
Yep.
Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Northeast Regional Habitat Assessment. This is a collaborative multidisciplinary project to develop decision support products for marine fish habitat management. So as Jamie mentioned, Jessica is the coordinator and the inshore team lead, co-lead for this, and Michelle Bachman is the other co-lead for the inshore team. I'm the offshore team lead, and as Jamie said, I am in Woods Hole at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, and that's on Wampanoag land. Some of our other teams are spread out throughout the Northeast region. Tori Kentner is a spatial ecologist. She'll be talking about some data that we've gathered for this project, and also a Shiny application where we've been able to collate all of our products together in a public-facing interface. Chris Hake is a research scientist, and he'll be talking about some modeling work that he's been doing with some multi-species models. So we've been working with a large group of other people. The steering committee was formed in 2017, and this was based on a recommendation from both the New England and the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Councils. And then we have inshore and offshore action teams, so a lot of people from other outside organizations, NGOs, providing input and data. We also have people working on a crosswalk between NERA and 2 different climate vulnerability assessments, and then other collaborators who've also provided data and methods support. So the goal of NERA is to describe and characterize estuarine, coastal, and offshore fish habitat distribution, abundance, and quality in the Northeast. And the steering committee identified 4 actions that are necessary to meet this goal. The first is inshore fish habitat assessment. So that includes fish distribution and abundance, as well as habitat distribution, status, and trends. The second is habitat vulnerability, including response to climate change and other changes. Third is spatial descriptions of species habitat use in the offshore area. And then the fourth is the habitat visualization and decision support tools. So the geographic scope ranges from North Carolina in the south to the western end of the Scotian Shelf, and includes the Mid-Atlantic Bight, the southern New England, Georges Bank, and Gulf of Maine regions of the US. And we start at mean high tide water level, which includes the estuaries, and then we extend to the shelf break, slope shelf break. In terms of what do we consider habitat, it's very broad. The Magnuson-Stevens Act is our management legislation, I guess, that defines the essential fish habitat as those waters and substrate that are necessary to fish for spawning, breeding, feeding, or growth to maturity. And for many species, that includes the entire water column. Temperature is very important. Pelagic species may be more dependent on the surface temperature, and the benthivores on the bottom. So a very broad range of habitat that we're including in our assessments. The Magnuson-Stevens Act also notes that ignoring habitat is a risk to sustainability, including direct and indirect habitat losses have resulted in a diminished capacity to support existing fishing levels. And one of the greatest long-term threats to the viability of fisheries is the continuing loss of marine, estuary, and other aquatic habitats. So it's we're glad that they acknowledge that habitat is an important aspect to managing fish. A little more about essential fish habitat designations. So under the MSA, the fishery management councils are required to designate essential fish habitat for all managed species. And these designations include text descriptions and maps. And NOAA Fisheries works with the councils to provide conservation recommendations to mitigate the impacts of projects on essential fish habitat. And then the habitat areas of particular concern or subsets of EFH that receive additional advanced scrutiny when projects are proposed in those areas. So the councils asked us to focus on over 65 species, so a broad range of species, fish species that we're including in our habitat work. And Tori's going to talk a lot more in depth about our products, but just at a glance, we have a number of different products, data inventory, including fish catch data, as well as environmental data sets, habitat use, including species profiles and stage-specific information, climate vulnerability, species and habitat crosswalks, habitat data visualization and decision support tools. This includes both the Shiny application that Tori's going to focus on, as well as we've been partnering with the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal, as well as the Northeast Ocean Data Portal, which are already up and ready for the public, and we're going to be adding our products into that. And then we'll also be including some scientific publications that should be coming out in the next months to year. So in terms of how we're using this habitat assessment, the first application is essential fish habitat, which it was designed for. So the spatial model outputs will serve as robust foundations for the EFH maps. Some species, we do need to include some additional information outside of the NERA scope, but generally our data covers a lot of what is needed for these maps. And then NERA provides more specificity on which environmental factors influence species distributions, and this will benefit both the EFH text descriptions and habitat area of particular concern designations. We also want to consider going forward information about habitat shifts, species distribution shifts, especially under climate scenarios. So that's going to be kind of our next step, is projecting forward in time. And we would like to be able to provide this information in order to move to an adaptive approach to designating EFH in the future. Another application is the status of ecosystem reports. So we're just finishing up the 2023 State of the Ecosystem reports for the Mid-Atlantic and New England councils. And they currently include a description of NERA in the habitat risk subsection. And we've also included this year a species richness index, which was from the NERA model outputs. And it was useful in that we can show a linear comparison over time. So our other indices of species richness have a breakpoint when we changed vessels, but this model can internally estimate these calibrations. And so that's useful looking at how species have shifted. So these are the 55 species that we're able to model that are regularly sampled. And we're seeing increases in richness in the northern regions, Gulf of Maine, Georges Bank, and a bit of a decline in the mid-Atlantic as species are moving north. So the future reports, we will expand on the managed species distributions and how they've changed, especially in relation to climate change. And of course, these are presented to both management councils. They're used directly for the managers. Another application is in single species stock assessments. So for the research track assessments, each assessment has a term of reference that's directly related to ecosystem work, and NERA products can be useful in addressing this term of reference. So in the fall of 2021, Tori Kempner provided habitat paper for the butterfish assessment, and she included habitat distribution changes over time for our, just trying to get that out there, for our current time series. And then she was able to add environmental drivers and along with the historic distributions, provide a projection of how the climate could, how the fish distribution could change with climate change going forward. And so that was useful in that term of reference. Then I added in some regime shift work to the butterfish assessment, looking at changes of butterfish condition or health over time and what environmental drivers may be impacting those changes. And that was useful in determining a recruitment stanza for the butterfish projections that was used directly in the management. And the NERA products are designed to address these types of questions because we parse the data into juveniles and adults and are able to look at these environmental drivers. So we're also we're working now on using these applications in the Atlantic mackerel assessment that will be occurring in June. And I think that's all I have for the first part, and I will hand it over to Jessica Semioto for the Canadian counterpart.
Great, thank you. Just